The US and China have announced a plan to work together on cutting their emissions in the next decade. The world's two biggest greenhouse gas emitters unveiled an agreement at the UN Climate Summit in Scotland that includes plans to reduce methane output, phase out coal consumption and protect forests. Though light on solid commitments, the pact could send a strong signal to some 200 other countries at the COP26 climate talks. Announcing the agreement, US Special Envoy John Kerry said China and the US may have their differences, but cooperation on climate was imperative.
We also expressed a shared desire for success at this COP on mitigation, adaptation, support, and frankly, all of the key issues which will result in the world raising ambition and being able to address this crisis. Now, with this announcement, we've arrived at a new step, a roadmap for our present and future collaboration on this issue.
So John Kerry says the US and China now have a roadmap for taking action. Chinese leaders have been noticeably absent from COP26, but China does have a chief climate negotiator there, and he also spoke of the important role the two countries share.
China and the US shoulder special international responsibilities and obligations. We need to think big and be responsible, and we need to work in line with the global trend and work hard to promote world peace and development. We need to actively address climate change and, through cooperation, bring more benefit to both our two peoples and people around the world.
Cutting coal will be key to China's emissions reduction targets, but the country is still expanding its use of the fossil fuel. Most of the country's energy comes from coal, and China is the world's largest producer and consumer of it. Our next report is from the city of Datong in Jiangxi province, which is considered the capital of coal mining in China.
At first sight, there's a sea of wind turbines blanketing the surrounding terrain. But this is Datong, China's coal capital. The city is so steeped in the industry, it even has a museum dedicated to its history. People have been mining coal in Datong for nearly 1,500 years. But as China tries to rid itself of fossil fuel-generated energy, many here are uncertain what the future holds for them and for the mines.
Maybe there won't be any in the future.
How would so many workers and their families survive without coal?
Li is a miner in Datong. Like several generations before him, he lives from coal production. His son has followed in his footsteps. Like in Datong, some 900 mines in Jiangxi province employ hundreds of thousands of people. For many, it's hard to imagine a life without them.
Where can we go then? I have no other skills and benefits. I can't live anywhere else. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die here. There's no work to do in other places.
For now, workers aren't too concerned. China's struggling to shake off its coal addiction, and there's little sign of those jobs drying up. China's ramped up investment in wind and solar energy in recent years, but it's still heavily reliant on coal to meet its massive power demands. Coal makes up around 60% of the country's total energy use, and over the last decade, it has consumed more of the fuel than the rest of the world combined. Last month, authorities ordered mines to boost coal production by nearly 100 million tons, to battle a power crunch threatening China's economic recovery from the coronavirus crisis. It's also needed to ease an expected energy supply shortage for winter. China has pledged that coal consumption will peak by 2025. But drastic reliance on the fuel source to meet energy demands has raised doubts about whether that's feasible.
What will happen after the peak is as important as when the peak will happen. Are we going to see a long plateau? And if so, that's probably not great news for climate change. Or are we seeing a steady decline or a drastic decline?
If China fails to cut coal out of its energy mix in time, it will be all the more difficult to achieve its bigger goal of net zero emissions by 2060.
I'm joined now by Julio Friedman from the Centre on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University. Dr. Friedman is one of the leading experts on carbon removal. Dr. Friedman, welcome. China is a major polluter, as we've just heard, heavily dependent on coal. How optimistic are you that its agreement announced at COP26 to boost climate cooperation with the US will yield the results that are needed?
I think that this announcement is a triumph, and I know that the diplomats and State Department officials working with their counterparts in China have been discussing this for 7 months, and it is a necessary step in order to get the world to a net zero economy.
So much of the focus is understandably here on what governments can do to reduce carbon emissions, but can carbon capture technology on the other side of this equation really be effective in tackling the problem?
Absolutely. It's noteworthy that among the topics highlighted in the US-China agreement, carbon capture technology was one that was singled out. And the reason why is because we cannot reach our net zero commitments without it, neither the US nor China or many other countries. And not just for the power sector, really for the heavy industrial sector is where carbon capture technology will be important. Another thing that was highlighted in the announcement was direct air capture, which is one of the many ways you can remove CO2 from the air and oceans. That technology is beginning to enter the marketplace, but again requires a great deal more investigation and support. But the science is clear and the technology works.
But the technology to remove carbon from the oceans and the atmosphere is in its infancy, as you say. You said that this needs to grow as an industry to be twice as big as the oil and gas sector within 30 years. Is that realistic? Who pays for it? And if it is realistic on that timescale, wouldn't that not be too late for us?
Well, we know the recipe to get this done. We've done the exact same thing with LED lights. We've done the exact same thing with batteries. We've done the exact same thing with wind and solar. The recipe is a combination of innovation and market aligning policies and private investment. And those are all beginning to happen in this space. Whether or not we get there in enough time is really up to us. But there is nothing in the physics or chemistry or politics that naturally prevents this outcome.
What are the risks of carbon capture and storage as we look further down the line? Could using CO2, storing CO2 underground just leave the problem for future generations when we don't know what that cost will be?
I think that is a misunderstanding of what carbon capture is and how it works. It is a radical departure from business as usual. And in point of fact, we have been putting CO2 in geological formations with zero incident and with zero leakage for over 50 years. It's quite the opposite, actually. Not doing this technology path, in fact, will unquestionably burden present and future generations. If we take direct action now, the Earth will eventually mineralize all the CO2 and essentially return the carbon to the Earth exactly where it came from.
Dr. Friedman from Columbia University Centre on Global Energy Policy. Thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.